The grand ballroom of the Langston estate gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers refracted light across gilded mirrors, and the scent of fresh orchids filled the air. Emma Bennet stood at the altar, her slender frame encased in a flowing white gown. Every detail of the wedding was meticulously planned, yet nothing felt real. Her gaze shifted to the man seated beside her. Ethan Langston, the enigmatic billionaire CEO, sat in a sleek black wheelchair. His dark hair was neatly combed, framing a face that bore sharp, striking features. Despite his physical limitations, he exuded an air of command that made it impossible for anyone to dismiss him. His hands rested on the armrests of his chair, unmoving, yet his piercing blue eyes radiated intensity. Emma had only met Ethan 6 months ago, during one of her lowest moments. Her ex-fiancé, Jeremy, had shattered her heart and her pride when she discovered his infidelity. Facing a whirlwind of shame and betrayal, she agreed to the proposal arranged by her family. A marriage to Ethan, a man she barely knew. The arrangement was pragmatic, mutually beneficial. Ethan needed an heir to solidify his legacy. Emma needed an escape from her past. The officiant's voice pulled her back to the moment. "Do you, Emma Bennet, take Ethan Langston to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Emma hesitated, her pulse quickening. Her eyes darted to Ethan, whose gaze locked on hers. There was no warmth in his expression, only a quiet expectation. With a deep breath, she forced herself to nod. "I do." The words tasted hollow, but the ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged, and rings slipped onto fingers. When the officiant DM'd them husband and wife, Ethan offered a small formal smile, as though sealing a business deal. As the guests erupted into polite applause, Emma felt a wave of unease wash over her. This was not how she had envisioned her life, yet she couldn't deny the peculiar pull Ethan had over her. Despite his stoic demeanor, there was something enigmatic about him, something that made her skin prickle with curiosity and wariness. That evening, in the privacy of their mansion, Ethan's icy demeanor thawed slightly. He handed her a glass of champagne, his movements deliberate and smooth. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice low and commanding. Emma raised her glass, noting the way his sharp eyes never left hers. To new beginnings? Their interactions were polite, but distant. Ethan was courteous, but unyielding, his words always carefully chosen. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he let on, but probing into his life felt forbidden. The following weeks passed in a blur of social obligations and quiet nights. The Langston family treated Emma with thinly veiled disdain. Ethan's older sister Vivian was particularly cruel, often making snide remarks about Emma's modest background. The whispers among the household staff didn't help either, fueling her growing sense of isolation. One night, Emma found herself wandering the halls of the mansion. Her thoughts were consumed by her ex-fiancé's betrayal and the strange unspoken rules of her new marriage. Her hand brushed against a hidden panel in the wall, and to her surprise it slid open, revealing a small room filled with books, documents, and a laptop. Curiosity burned in her chest. She stepped inside, her fingers skimming the edges of the desk. A folder caught her eye labeled with Ethan's name. Before she could open it, the sound of a throat clearing startled her. She spun around to find Ethan in the doorway, his wheelchair perfectly positioned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. "You're a curious one, aren't you?" he said, his voice laced with amusement and a hint of warning. Emma's cheeks flushed. I was just exploring," he interrupted, wheeling closer. The air between them grew thick with tension. "Be careful, Emma. Curiosity can be dangerous." As the days turned into weeks, Emma began noticing strange inconsistencies. Ethan's movements, though subtle, seemed more deliberate than those of someone with a severe disability. She caught him gripping the edge of a table with strength he shouldn't have had, and once saw him stand briefly when he thought no one was watching. Her suspicions grew, but she kept them to herself. She had no proof, only fleeting moments that left her questioning everything. 3 months into their marriage, Emma's life took an unexpected turn. She stared at the test in her trembling hands, the word pregnant glaring back at her. Her emotions churned, a mix of disbelief, fear, and a tiny flicker of hope. She decided to tell Ethan during dinner that evening. The Langston dining room was as imposing as ever. Emma sat across from Ethan, who seemed preoccupied with his tablet. She cleared her throat, drawing his attention. "I have news," she began cautiously. He set the tablet down, his gaze steady. "Go on." "I'm pregnant." For the first time since their marriage, Ethan's composure cracked. His eyes widened slightly before narrowing. "Are you certain?" Emma nodded, bracing herself for his reaction. She expected something. Relief, anger, even joy. But his face hardened into an unreadable mask. "That complicates things," he muttered under his breath, almost too quietly for her to hear. Before she could question him, the dining room doors burst open. Isabella stormed in, her expression alight with fury. "Well, isn't this perfect?" Isabella sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "The gold digger's pregnant. How convenient." Emma's heart sank. The room filled with tension as the Langston family's judgment bore down on her. Ethan remained silent, his eyes fixed on his untouched plate. For the first time, Emma felt utterly alone in her marriage, her life unraveling as the weight of their secrets loomed over her. And just like that, the night took a turn Emma never anticipated. A whispered remark, a fleeting look, a revelation she wasn't prepared for. The Langston estate was shrouded in a tense silence after the explosive dinner. Emma retreated to her room, the sting of Isabella's words fresh in her mind. Her hand instinctively rested on her stomach, a protective gesture as she tried to process her new reality. She was carrying Ethan's child, a man she barely knew whose secrets now seemed deeper and darker than ever. The next morning, Emma avoided the family breakfast. She wandered the mansion's sprawling gardens instead, hoping to find solace in the soft rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds. But peace eluded her. The weight of Ethan's reaction, or lack thereof, pressed on her chest. Had he not wanted a child, or was it something else entirely? Later that day, Emma was summoned to Ethan's study. The room was a fortress of dark wood and leather, with bookshelves reaching the ceiling. Ethan sat behind an imposing desk, his wheelchair positioned with precision. His expression was as impassive as ever, but his eyes bore into hers with unsettling intensity. "Emma," he began, his voice measured. "About last night," she swallowed hard, bracing herself. "Yes?" He gestured for her to sit, and she complied, her heart pounding. "The pregnancy changes things," he said. "Our arrangement, it wasn't meant to include complications of this nature." "Complications," she echoed, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "Is that what you think of your own child?" Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment, a flicker of something. Regret? Frustration? Crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "This isn't about the child, it's about control. There are expectations in this family, and a pregnancy shifts the balance." Emma's anger flared. "If you didn't want a family, why agree to this marriage? Why put me through this charade?" His lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "Charades are the foundation of this family, Emma. You'll come to understand that." That evening, Emma decided she'd had enough of cryptic answers. She returned to the hidden studies she'd discovered weeks ago, determined to uncover whatever Ethan was hiding. The folder with his name still lay on the desk, untouched since her last visit. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were medical reports, timelines, and correspondence with doctors. At first glance, it all seemed legitimate. Records of Ethan's accident and subsequent paralysis. But as she flipped through the pages, anomalies began to surface. Discrepancies in dates, conflicting statements from physicians. One document stood out, a report indicating Ethan's injuries were not as severe as he claimed. It suggested he could have recovered full mobility months ago. Emma's mind raced. Could it be true? Was Ethan faking his disability? The sound of approaching footsteps jolted her out of her thoughts. She quickly closed the folder and slipped it back into its place. Turning toward the door, she found herself face to face with Ethan. His expression was colder than she'd ever seen it. "You really don't listen, do you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. I just, I wanted answers, she stammered, her courage faltering under his glare. And you think rifling through my personal documents is the way to get them? His tone was sharp, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, fear or perhaps anger at being discovered. The tension between them grew palpable in the days that followed. Emma couldn't look at Ethan without questioning everything. His movements, his demeanor, the very foundation of their marriage. All of it felt like a lie, yet confronting him directly seemed impossible. Ethan was a man who thrived on control, and she feared what he might do if she pushed too hard. Meanwhile, the Langston family grew more insufferable. Isabella's barbs became more pointed, her disdain for Emma practically dripping from her every word. At a family dinner, Isabella sneered, "It's amusing, isn't it? A nobody like you thinking you can secure your place here with a baby." Before Emma could respond, Ethan cut in, his voice ice cold. "Enough, Isabella." His words silenced the room, but the damage was done. Emma felt the humiliation settle deep in her bones. That night, as she lay in bed, tears streaming down her face, she made a vow to herself. She would uncover the truth about Ethan, no matter the cost. Weeks later, a significant revelation presented itself. Emma attended a gala with Ethan, her role as his wife, a performative act she was growing accustomed to. The event was lavish, filled with the elite of society. Ethan, as always, commanded attention, despite his apparent disability. But Emma noticed something. During a moment of distraction, Ethan had reached out to steady himself on a nearby chair. Not with the cautious movements of someone physically impaired, but with the ease of a man who knew his strength. Her heart pounded. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. Ethan was hiding something monumental. Determined to confront him, Emma waited until they returned home. She found him in the study, the faint glow of a desk lamp illuminating his face. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Are you really paralyzed?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might deny it. But then he surprised her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "What if I'm not?" he said, his voice calm and measured. The admission hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered backward, her mind reeling. Why would you lie about something like that? Ethan rose slowly from his wheelchair, his movements fluid and deliberate. He stood before her, tall and imposing. The truth laid bare. "Because power is perception, Emma," he said, his tone eerily calm, "and vulnerability is the most potent illusion of all." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The man she thought she knew was a stranger, a master manipulator with secrets darker than she could have imagined. In that moment, the foundation of their fragile marriage shattered completely, and Emma realized she wasn't just fighting for the truth, she was fighting for her very survival. Emma couldn't move. Her breath came in shallow gasps. As she stared at Ethan, who now stood tall, his imposing figure dominating the room. The air between them felt heavy, suffused with unspoken words and shattered illusions. He wasn't just hiding the truth about his mobility. Ethan Langston was hiding the very essence of who he was. "Say something," Ethan said, his tone unreadable. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Why? Why what?" he countered, stepping closer. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and entirely unlike the man she thought she had married. "Why lie? Why pretend to be someone you're not?" Emma's words tumbled out in a rush, her anger and confusion bubbling to the surface. "You let the world believe you were paralyzed. You let me believe it. For what? Sympathy? Control?" Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk, but his eyes remained cold. "Sympathy is a weapon, Emma. People let their guard down when they think you're vulnerable. They underestimate you. And when they do, you hold all the power." She shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. That's monstrous." "Is it?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with menace. "Or is it survival?" The following days passed in a haze of tension and silence. Emma avoided Ethan as much as possible, retreating to her room or wandering the estate grounds aimlessly. But the revelation about his deception haunted her. Every interaction with him now felt like a carefully orchestrated performance, leaving her unsure of what was real. Worse still, the Langston family's treatment of her only grew more hostile. Isabella seemed to sense Emma's vulnerability and exploited it at every opportunity. Didn't take long for the cracks to show, Isabella sneered one afternoon as they crossed paths in the hallway. You thought marrying Ethan would give you power, didn't you? Poor, naive little Emma. Emma clenched her fists, fighting the urge to respond. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and now with the pregnancy even more isolated. But deep down a fire burned within her, a resolve to fight back, to reclaim her agency in a world that seemed hell-bent on breaking her. As the weeks wore on, Emma began piecing together fragments of Ethan's life. Her quiet observations and careful inquiries with the staff revealed more than she expected. Ethan's rise to power had been as meteoric as it was mysterious. There were rumors of ruthless deals, shadowy partnerships, and a string of adversaries who had mysteriously disappeared. One evening, she ventured into the hidden study once more, determined to uncover more about the man she had married. This time, her search led her to a locked drawer in the desk. After several tense minutes of fumbling with a paperclip, the lock clicked open. Inside, she found a small collection of items: a flash drive, a leather-bound journal, and several photographs. The journal contained cryptic entries, references to deals and people she didn't recognize. The photos, however, sent a chill down her spine. They showed Ethan with a woman she didn't know, her face radiant with laughter. The intimacy in their body language was undeniable. Emma's stomach twisted. Who was this woman? And what did she mean to Ethan? The next morning, Emma confronted him. She found him in the conservatory, a rare moment of solitude where he seemed almost at ease. When she held up one of the photographs, his expression darkened. Where did you find that? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. In your study, she replied, her voice trembling but resolute. Who is she, Ethan? Another lie you've been keeping. Ethan snatched the photo from her hand, his jaw tightening. Her name is Sophia, he said after a long pause. She was important to me. Was? Emma pressed, her chest tightening. She died, he said simply, his tone devoid of emotion. For a moment, Emma felt a pang of sympathy, but the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. If Sophia had been so important to him, why had he never mentioned her? And why were her photos hidden away like a dark secret? As Emma delved deeper into Ethan's life, another revelation shook her to her core. A conversation with a longtime staff member revealed that Ethan's father, the original patriarch of the Langston Empire, had been involved in several scandals that were quietly buried. The Langston name, it seemed, was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. One night as she lay awake in bed, the pieces began to fall into place. Ethan's need for control, his obsession with maintaining a facade of vulnerability, it all stemmed from a legacy of manipulation and power plays. But where did that leave her? And what did it mean for their child? Emma's breaking point came during another family dinner. Vivian, emboldened by Emma's silence, launched into yet another tirade. I don't know why you're still here, Vivian said with a mocking smile. Do you really think you'll last in this family? Women like you are disposable, Emma. Enough, Emma's voice rang out, startling everyone at the table. For the first time, she stood her ground. I'm tired of your games, Vivian. You can insult me all you want, but I'm not going anywhere. The room fell silent. Ethan, who had been watching the exchange, with a faint smirk, finally spoke. Well, it seems Emma has found her voice. But his words felt more like a challenge than a compliment. The night ended in an explosive argument between Emma and Ethan. You think this is some game, don't you? She accused, her voice shaking with anger. You manipulate everyone around you, even me. What kind of man does that? Ethan's expression hardened. The kind of man who survives. And what about our child? She demanded. Do they deserve to grow up in this web of lies and deceit? For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then his voice softened. revealing a sliver of vulnerability. Everything I've done, Emma, is to protect what's mine. You included. Protect me, she scoffed. You've done nothing but lie to me since the day we met. The confrontation left Emma more determined than ever to take control of her own fate. She began making plans, small secret steps to secure her future and her child's. But just as she started to find her footing, another twist threatened to upend everything. Late one night, she received an anonymous envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ethan in an intimate moment with Sophia, alive, vibrant, and very much not the tragic figure he had described. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note read, "The truth is closer than you think." Emma's heart raced as she stared at the image. It was clear now. Ethan wasn't just hiding secrets. He was guarding a dangerous truth that could unravel not just their marriage, but the entire Langston empire, and she was caught in the middle of it. As she tucked the photo away, a chilling realization settled over her. Whatever Ethan was hiding, it wasn't just about power or control. It was about survival, his, hers, and their unborn child's. And the storm brewing on the horizon promised to destroy everything in its path. The photograph with Sophia's radiant face and the cryptic note on the back weighed heavily in Emma's hands. She tucked it into her bedside drawer, her mind spinning with questions. The anonymous sender clearly knew more about Ethan than she did, and this revelation pushed her closer to the edge. Her marriage, precarious and built on deception, was unraveling at a speed she could no longer control. As the night deepened, Emma stared at the ceiling of her lavish yet cold bedroom. What did the note mean? Was Sophia alive? If so, why had Ethan lied about her death? And who had sent the envelope? The mansion's silence became oppressive, amplifying her unease. She knew she couldn't confront Ethan, not without more proof. If he'd lied about his paralysis, his past, and possibly Sophia, there was no telling on how far his manipulations extended. The following morning, Emma resolved to investigate further. She began with the staff, subtly asking questions about Ethan's past. Most of them were tight-lipped, their loyalty to Ethan unwavering. But one elderly maid, Mrs. Harper, let something slip during a casual conversation. "Mr. Langston hasn't been the same since Sophia," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. She brought out a side of him we rarely see. "What do you mean?" Emma pressed gently, feigning curiosity. "Oh, I shouldn't speak out of turn," Mrs. Harper replied, suddenly wary. "But let's just say she left a mark on him." Emma's heart pounded. Mrs. Harper's words confirmed what she had suspected. Sophia wasn't just a passing figure in Ethan's life. She was central to who he was, and perhaps to what he had become. That evening, Emma returned to the locked drawer. In Ethan's study, she had memorized his movements over the past few weeks and knew he wouldn't be home for hours. This time she focused on the flash drive. Plugging it into her laptop, she discovered a trove of encrypted files. Her limited tech skills weren't enough to decode them, but one file caught her attention. It wasn't encrypted. The file contained a series of emails exchanged between Ethan and someone named Lucas. The tone was cryptic, but urgent. One email stood out: "Lucas, we can't afford any loose ends. If Sophia resurfaces, it could destroy everything we've built." Emma's blood ran cold. Sophia wasn't just someone from Ethan's past. She was a threat to his present. But why, and what did he mean by resurfaces? The idea that Sophia might still be alive felt both absurd and terrifying. As days turned into weeks, Emma's investigations consumed her. She combed through Ethan's study whenever she had the chance, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that only grew more sinister. Meanwhile, the Langston family's hostility reached new heights. Isabella seemed determined to break her spirit, throwing veiled threats and snide remarks at every turn. "You're playing a dangerous game, Emma," Isabella said one afternoon. Cornering her in the hallway, Ethan doesn't take kindly to betrayal. Emma met her gaze, refusing to back down. And what about you, Isabella? How far would you go to protect your secrets? Isabella's eyes flickered, with something Emma couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. But before she could press further, Isabella walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The turning point came one stormy night when Emma's suspicions were finally confirmed. She was returning from the library when she heard voices coming from Ethan's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she recognized Ethan's voice, low and controlled. The other voice, however, was unfamiliar. "She's digging too deep," the stranger said. "If she finds out about Sophia—" "She won't," Ethan interrupted sharply. "I'll handle Emma. Focus on keeping Sophia out of sight." Emma's heart thundered in her chest. They were talking about her and Sophia. The truth was no longer just an abstract threat. It was dangerously close. Unable to contain her anger and fear, Emma decided to confront Ethan that same night. She found him in the conservatory, gazing out at the rain-soaked garden. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, a man burdened by the weight of his choices. But Emma wasn't fooled. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "Sophia," she said, holding up the photograph she'd hidden in her drawer. "She's not dead, is she?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Anger, perhaps, or fear. "What do you think you know?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I know you've been lying to me since the day we met," she shot back. "I know Sophia's alive. And I know you're hiding something, something big enough to destroy you." Ethan took a step toward her, his towering presence intimidating. But Emma stood her ground, her anger outweighing her fear. "You think you've uncovered some great secret," he said, his voice low and cold. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then tell me," she demanded. "Stop treating me like a pawn in your game, and tell me the truth." For a moment it seemed as though he might, but then he turned away, his shoulders tense. "Leave it alone, Emma," he said, "for your sake and for our child's." But Emma couldn't leave it alone. The next day she received another anonymous envelope. Inside was a single key and an address scribbled on a piece of paper. The note read, "The answers you're looking for are here." Without telling anyone, Emma followed the address to a secluded cabin on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as she stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The cabin was sparsely furnished, but one detail caught her attention immediately: a framed photograph of Sophia sitting on a wooden mantelpiece. Before she could process what she was seeing, a voice spoke behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Emma spun around to find herself face to face with Sophia. She was older than in the photographs, but unmistakably the same woman. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, bore into Emma's. "You're Sophia," Emma whispered, the words catching in her throat. Sophia nodded, her expression guarded. "And you must be Emma." The confrontation that followed shattered what little remained of Emma's understanding. Sophia revealed the truth. She had faked her death years ago to escape Ethan's control, but when Ethan's empire began to crumble under scrutiny, he tracked her down and forced her into hiding to protect his secrets. "He's dangerous," Sophia said, her voice heavy with regret. "He'll do whatever it takes to protect what he's built." Emma felt the weight of Sophia's words sink in. She was trapped in a web far darker and more intricate than she had imagined. But now, armed with the truth, she knew what she had to do. Returning to the mansion, Emma confronted Ethan one final time. This time, she held nothing back. "I met her," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Sophia, she told me everything." Ethan's expression didn't falter, but his eyes darkened. "And what will you do with that information?" "I'm leaving," she said. "I'm taking our child, and I'm leaving this toxic world you've created." "You think it's that simple?" Ethan asked, his voice cold and sharp. You think you can just walk away? I have no choice, and she said, her voice breaking. I refuse to let our child grow up in this. For the first time, Ethan seemed truly shaken, but instead of trying to stop her, he simply nodded. Do what you must, and he said, but know this, you'll always be tied to me, Emma, no matter where you go. As Emma packed her bags and left the Langston estate, she felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was no longer the same woman who had walked into that marriage. The truth had set her free, but it had also left scars that would never fully heal. And as she drove away, the mansion disappearing in the rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that her story with Ethan was far from over. This story follows Emma Bennet, a woman thrust into an arranged marriage with Ethan Langston, a wealthy and enigmatic billionaire. As Emma uncovers layers of deceit, manipulation, and dark secrets within the Langston family, she discovers not only the truth about her husband, but also her own inner strength. Her final decision to leave Ethan, protecting herself and her unborn child, highlights the courage it takes to break free from lies and reclaim one's life. The story teaches us that truth is paramount in life. Facing it, no matter how painful, and standing firm in one's values are essential for a fulfilling life. Like Emma, we must sometimes step out of our comfort zones to seek genuine freedom. Did you enjoy this story? Share your thoughts about Emma's decisions and the Langston family secrets in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like to support this video and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories.